What are some of the benefits that visa-free travel would bring to Africans?
The first thing is money. For every dollar that you invest in tourism, for instance, you get about $10 back. Africa gets only about 2.5% of the global tourism revenue. If you're counting international tourism receipts. A lot of that is because people within Europe are able to travel to Europe. People within America are able to travel to the Americas, okay? And so if you boost domestic tourism, you're getting a lot of money back.
What happens when a country scarred by war suddenly tears down its borders? Burkina Faso has just abolished visa fees for all Africans, a move no one saw coming. But why would a nation under siege open its doors so wide? Is this survival or is it revolution? Let's find that out. On Thursday afternoon in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's cabinet meeting concluded with an announcement that rippled across the continent. The country's security minister, Mahamadou Sana, stepped before the press to declare something that sounded almost unbelievable in a world of tightening borders. All Africans, regardless of their country of origin, will now be able to enter Burkina Faso without paying visa fees. The declaration carried weight not just because of its content, but because of the way it was delivered. Sana explained that any citizen from an African country could now apply online for travel authorization, free of charge. The only step required is a simple digital process, intended to speed up approvals while eliminating the financial burden that for years had turned borders into barriers. To many, the statement sounded like a revolution in bureaucratic language. The cold mechanics of visa fees, embassy appointments, and endless queues had been replaced with an invitation. Come, enter. This land is yours too. This was not a leak whispered through unofficial channels. It was a government decree, signed off by Captain Ibrahim Traore himself. The symbolism of the red beret leader presiding over the decision cannot be overstated. For a country often cast in the international press as fragile and fractured, Burkina Faso suddenly presented itself as bold, confident, and ready to embrace the continent. Almost immediately, reactions poured in. On social media, young Africans celebrated with hashtags calling it a new dawn for Pan-African travel. Commentators in neighboring countries drew parallels with Rwanda, Kenya, and Ghana, which had recently enacted similar policies. But there was also something distinct here. Unlike Rwanda, known for stability and its drive toward modern governance, or Ghana, with its long-standing reputation for hospitality, Burkina Faso is in the throes of conflict. It is not the polished face of Africa that usually makes headlines for progressive reform. That contrast alone made the announcement feel shocking, even defiant. Practical consequences were discussed almost immediately. Traders across West Africa noted how the removal of fees could make cross-border commerce easier, especially for small-scale entrepreneurs who often operate on thin margins. Tour operators and cultural promoters envisioned new opportunities. Film festivals, music concerts, and art fairs in Ouagadougou could now attract visitors without the heavy costs that discouraged regional participation. Even students and researchers, who frequently struggle with visa costs when attending conferences, began imagining the possibility of freer academic exchange. But as the dust settled, deeper questions emerged. Why now? Why would Burkina Faso, which the Western media says is a country where nearly 40% of the territory is under the shadow of insurgent groups, choose to launch such an ambitious Pan-African gesture? Some argued it was a bold attempt to shift the narrative away from insecurity and toward unity. Others saw it as a strategic move to strengthen solidarity at a time when Burkina Faso has cut ties with ECOWAS, the West African regional bloc. Whatever the reason, the decision immediately elevated Burkina Faso's position in continental debates about mobility and sovereignty. Western analysts were quick to frame it with skepticism, pointing out the insurgent violence and instability that still gripped the country. But their critiques only underscored how extraordinary this policy shift is. In a region where fear and conflict dominate headlines, Burkina Faso is daring to craft a story of openness. It is presenting itself not as a victim of chaos, but as an architect of unity. The announcement raises another critical issue. Is this simply a symbolic gesture to win hearts across Africa, or the first step toward a deeper transformation of how Africans move, trade, and live across the continent? That is the question we must explore next. When Burkina Faso's government unveiled the visa-free decision, the first reaction across the continent was surprise. But behind the shock lies a carefully chosen moment. This was not a random announcement. It comes at a time when the country, along with Mali and Niger, has just walked out of ECOWAS, the regional bloc long considered the backbone of West African integration. To many observers, leaving ECOWAS seemed like a step toward isolation. Yet instead of retreating, Burkina Faso widened its circle, signaling that African unity can be built outside old frameworks. The timing is critical. ECOWAS had become a contested space, accused by its critics of being more responsive to Western interests than to the needs of African people. Sanctions imposed on countries under military rule, including Burkina Faso, deepened resentment and suspicion. In walking away, Captain Ibrahim Traore and his allies risked being portrayed as separatists who wanted to cut themselves off from the region. The visa-free policy turns that narrative on its head. Rather than closing doors, Burkina Faso has opened them wider than ever before, but on its own terms, not dictated by regional or foreign powers. This is more than just political theater. For Burkina Faso, the move addresses a practical concern: the need to reinforce bonds of solidarity at a time of external pressure. By waiving visa fees for all Africans, Ouagadougou is saying to its neighbors and to the wider continent, "We may have left ECOWAS, but we have not left Africa." The country is positioning itself not as a rebel state on the margins, but as a trailblazer of a different kind of integration, one based on Pan-African conviction rather than institutional compliance. The decision also reflects an acute awareness of symbolism in diplomacy. In Africa, borders are more than lines on a map. They are scars of colonial partition. To remove barriers, even partially, is to challenge the very legacy of those divisions. By acting now, Burkina Faso signals that it is not content to wait for slow-moving continental bodies to implement decades-old promises. It is choosing action over delay, and timing it in a way that maximizes political impact. Yet there is another layer to this moment: the domestic audience. Inside Burkina Faso, the people face daily challenges, insecurity, displacement, and economic strain. By framing the country as a leader of continental unity, Traore gives citizens something larger than hardship to hold on to. The announcement positions Burkina Faso not as a victim of the crisis, but as a pioneer of freedom. It fosters pride at home while projecting influence abroad. The international context also plays a role. At a time when Western nations are tightening immigration rules, raising visa costs, and erecting walls, Burkina Faso has gone in the opposite direction. This contrast is deliberate. It tells Africans, while others shut you out, we welcome you. And it tells the world, Africa's path does not need to mirror yours. The timing amplifies the defiance, aligning Burkina Faso's policy with a global narrative of resistance to Western dominance. Of course, questions remain. Was this purely a symbolic maneuver to counter criticism of leaving ECOWAS, or is it part of a larger strategy to reshape how Africa connects? Is Burkina Faso positioning itself as a hub for African trade, culture, and solidarity, even amid insecurity? The choice of timing suggests this is more than a publicity stunt. It is a calculated move to redefine the meaning of unity in a fractured region. But this naturally leads us to another question. If timing and politics explain why the policy was launched now, what explains the vision behind it? To answer that, we must look not just at Burkina Faso as a state, but at the man whose leadership has become synonymous with Pan-African defiance, Captain Ibrahim Traore. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Still in his 30s, Traore is not the polished statesman of old, trained in Western capitals and fluent in diplomatic caution. He is a soldier who rose from the chaos of a country under siege and seized power in 2022, not by promising to serve old masters, but by vowing to defy them. In him, many Africans see not just a leader, but a living emblem of resistance and possibility. Traore's worldview is steeped in Pan-Africanism. From the very beginning of his rule, his rhetoric has been clear: Africa must break free from the chains of colonialism, both visible and invisible. Unlike earlier leaders who often blended such rhetoric with concessions to outside powers, Traore has consistently spoken in the language of independence. He has rejected dependency on Western institutions, criticized former colonial powers for exploiting African wealth, and elevated the idea of unity among Africans themselves. But speeches alone do not explain his rising influence. Across the continent, what resonates is his willingness to act. Abolishing visa fees for Africans is not a statement in a conference hall. It is a real policy with tangible effects. It turns the idea of Pan-African solidarity into something ordinary people can feel when they cross a border, attend a festival, or build a business in another African land. That translation of ideology into policy is what separates Traore from those who came before him. Part of his appeal lies in contrast. In many African capitals, leaders are criticized for being distant, beholden to foreign interests, or unwilling to take risks. Traore's image is the opposite. A young officer in fatigues, red beret tilted, speaking bluntly about Africa's right to chart its own course. This authenticity, whether cultivated or genuine, has made him a symbol for millions of young Africans disillusioned with politics as usual. His rise also coincides with a generational shift. Africa's population is young, restless, and hyper-connected through social media. In this digital arena, Traore's words and actions spread like wildfire. Memes, videos, and quotes elevate him into a pan-African hero, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes misrepresented, but always carrying a sense of defiance that speaks to the moment. Even when critics accuse him of authoritarianism, the counterweight of his pan-African gestures often overshadows such concerns in the eyes of his supporters. Yet Traore's vision is not merely about optics, it reflects a deeper calculation. By positioning Burkina Faso as a champion of African unity, he is building a shield of legitimacy that extends beyond his borders. In a country still struggling with insurgencies and fragile institutions, that continental recognition becomes a form of protection. It is harder for outside powers to dismiss or isolate a leader who has become an icon of African pride. There is also a moral dimension to his strategy. Traore frames Africa's struggle not just as political or economic, but as existential. He often speaks of dignity, of Africans no longer begging at foreign tables, of Africans respecting themselves enough to break down artificial barriers. Removing visa fees is an embodiment of that idea. It is a gesture that says Africans deserve to move freely across Africa because this is their continent, their inheritance, their right. But every vision invites questions. Can gestures of Pan-African solidarity translate into concrete regional transformation? Can a leader battling insurgency at home truly set the agenda for a continent? Or is the power of Traore's vision precisely that it dares to dream bigger than his circumstances? These questions take us beyond one man's leadership and into a wider trend that is shaping Africa itself. To see whether Burkina Faso's decision will endure, we must understand how it fits into the larger continental shift already underway. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. When Captain Ibrahim Traore declared Burkina Faso open to Africans without visa fees, he was not acting in a vacuum. His decision may have startled many, but in truth, it belongs to a growing wave sweeping across the continent. From Kigali to Accra to Nairobi, governments are rethinking how Africans move within Africa. For decades, integration was a promise written in African Union declarations and continental charters. Today, it is slowly and often unevenly being written into law. The momentum has been building. Rwanda was among the earliest to act, announcing that all Africans could enter without visas. Ghana followed this year by extending the same welcome to African passport holders. Kenya went further, declaring itself fully visa-free in 2023, though it still requires travelers to register electronically before arriving. Each of these moves broke with the old colonial logic that made it easier for a European tourist to step onto African soil than for a neighboring African to cross the same border. Burkina Faso's announcement stands out precisely because of the context in which it comes. Unlike Rwanda or Kenya, often portrayed as stable reformers, Burkina Faso has been wrestling with insurgency and economic strain. By aligning itself with the same movement toward openness, it transforms what could have been read as isolation, after leaving ECOWAS into participation in a continental revolution. It declares, we are not stepping back, we are stepping forward, but toward Africa itself. The push for open borders is not just about easing travel, it is about creating the conditions for a single African market. The African Continental Free Trade Area AfCFTA, launched in 2021, is already the world's largest trade bloc by population. Yet without mobility, trade agreements remain fragile. Free movement of goods must be matched by free movement of people, traders, students, researchers, and cultural ambassadors who give life to economic policies. Burkina Faso's visa reform is therefore not only symbolic, it is functional. It aligns domestic policy with continental ambitions, bringing the dream of integration closer to reality. At the heart of this trend lies a recognition of history. Borders in Africa were not drawn by Africans. They were the legacy of European colonizers carving lines across maps with little regard for ethnic, cultural, or economic realities. For decades, those lines hardened into barriers, choking off communities and fragmenting shared spaces. To dismantle these barriers, even partially, is to challenge colonial design with African will. Burkina Faso's gesture, alongside those of Rwanda, Kenya, and Ghana, is part of a new cartography, one in which Africa redraws itself not with ink on paper, but with freedom of movement. This continental shift also holds profound cultural meaning. It allows Africans to see each other more easily, to participate in festivals, academic exchanges, and sporting events without prohibitive costs. It restores a sense of belonging across the continent. When a Nigerian artist can perform in Ouagadougou as freely as in Lagos, when a Senegalese student can attend a conference in Accra without draining family savings on fees, integration becomes a lived reality, not just policy language. Of course, not every government has embraced the trend. Some still cling to visa regimes as tools of control or revenue. Skeptics argue that insecurity and porous borders make free movement dangerous. But these arguments mirror those once used in Europe before the Schengen zone reshaped travel across dozens of countries. Africa's advocates for open borders counter that integration itself is part of the answer to insecurity, by strengthening trust, trade, and cooperation, not by isolating neighbors. What makes Burkina Faso's move especially powerful is how it reframes its own image. For years, outsiders have described the country only in terms of conflict and fragility. Now, by aligning itself with the vanguard of African integration, it positions itself as a contributor to a continental future rather than a victim of circumstance. It claims agency in defining what Africa can become. But if Burkina Faso's decision is part of a larger continental trend, the next question is this: what does it mean for a nation still battling insurgency, struggling economically, and carrying the weight of its internal crises? Can unity and openness survive in the face of such challenges, or is this the very reason they are most needed? That is the question we must turn to next. Burkina Faso's new visa-free policy arrives not from a position of comfort, but from one of strain. Large swaths of the country remain contested by insurgent groups, entire communities live under threat, and the state's resources are stretched thin. At first glance, it might seem counterintuitive for such a nation to throw open its doors when its own house is under siege. Yet it is precisely within this turbulence that the gesture takes on its deepest meaning. Unity for Burkina Faso is not a luxury, it is survival. Insurgencies thrive in isolation. When communities feel abandoned, when borders choke off solidarity, insurgent groups fill the vacuum with narratives of despair. By inviting Africans in, Burkina Faso disrupts that cycle. The country signals to its people and to its neighbors that it is not a forgotten battlefield, but a part of a shared continental project. This is more than hospitality, it is strategy. An open door to Africans is also a closed door to narratives that portray Burkina Faso as fractured, alone, or disposable. The move also builds what might be called political armor. Western powers and regional blocs have sought to pressure Burkina Faso through sanctions, isolation, and criticism. Such tools are less effective when a nation anchors its legitimacy in Pan-African solidarity rather than external approval. Every African traveler who enters Burkina Faso without fees becomes a small act of validation, reinforcing the government's claim that its strength comes from Africa itself, not from foreign endorsement. In this sense, the visa policy doubles as resistance. Resistance to Western paternalism, resistance to imposed dependence, and resistance to the idea that a struggling nation must remain on its knees. Economically, the benefits may appear modest at first, but they carry long-term weight. Tourism, trade fairs, academic conferences, and cultural festivals, all of which Burkina Faso has a history of hosting, are more likely to flourish when the cost of entry is lowered. Even in an economy strained by conflict, these flows of people bring opportunities that no aid package can replicate. Every visiting merchant, artist, or scholar adds a thread to a fabric of resilience. In this way, unity is transformed into a resource, one that insurgents cannot tax and outsiders cannot sanction. Yet the most profound dimension of this policy lies in its symbolism. For citizens living under the shadow of violence, it says, "We are not only defined by war." It offers an alternative story of who they are and what their country represents. For young Africans watching from afar, it demonstrates that even a nation under siege can choose openness over fear. The power of this message should not be underestimated. It reclaims dignity not only for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as a whole. Critics may argue that the gesture is too fragile, that without stability, it cannot endure. But this is to misunderstand its purpose. The decision is not made because conditions are perfect. It is made because conditions are dire. In times of weakness, unity becomes the strongest weapon. By lifting visa fees for Africans, Burkina Faso is investing in solidarity as a shield, betting that collective identity and cooperation can succeed where isolation and dependence have failed. And so, the story comes full circle. What began as a shocking headline, a small country abolishing visa fees for an entire continent, reveals itself as something deeper. It is not simply about paperwork or border controls. It is about survival, dignity, and the rewriting of Africa's future. By embracing unity in a time of struggle, Burkina Faso has reminded the world of a truth too often ignored. Even in the darkest conditions, Africa can choose its own light. The question now lingers beyond Ouagadougou. If Burkina Faso can dare to open its borders amid chaos, what excuse do stronger, wealthier African nations have for keeping theirs closed? Let us know in the comment section. Should more nations do the same? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.